Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our asset-based advising in a co-requisite system presentation as part of the NCHI Professional Development Academic Advising Series. My name is Theo Meek, and I'm with Student Ready Strategies. It is a pleasure to welcome you all today. And to get things kicked off, I would first like to introduce the Nevada System of Higher Education Vice Chancellor, Crystal Abba, who has helped curate all of this work and bring it all together. So Vice Chancellor Abba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Theo. I wanted to take an opportunity to welcome everyone today and thank the participants and the presenters. This issue of asset-based equitable advising in a virtual environment for our advisors is more important than ever. It is not lost on me, nor the Chancellor, nor the Board of Regents how important a role advisors will play in full CoRec implementation come this fall 21. We all know the unfortunate situation we face with this pandemic, and that many of high school seniors that will be graduating this year and entering our doors next year are likely to be less prepared than they would have otherwise. And this work could not be more important than ever. And your role in advising and making sure that students are aware of what CoRec will mean for them and improving their likelihood for success is more important than ever. So I just wanted to thank you all and express the gratitude of the Chancellor and the Board of Regents, particularly the ARSA Committee and Chair Jason Geddes, and welcome you to today's session, and enjoy yourselves. You're in great hands with Theo and Vanessa, and I'm grateful for everyone's work. So thank you all and have a good day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor Abba. And hello, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you again. I hope a lot of you are the folks that we saw in December at our first kickoff meeting to the Advising Professional Development series with NCHI. And to be here again with you today at the third event in this series. That went really fast. I feel like we're in a time warp as we are all in our homes and doing everything virtually. I'm Vanessa Cadle. I serve as the Senior Vice President at Student Ready Strategies. And last December, I had that privilege to give you some knowledge on the foundations of Corequisite support, sort of developing a baseline around what it is the evidence behind it, why you're doing it in Nevada. And so I'm excited to be back with you today. I understand that you call it learning support in Nevada. And so you may hear us going back and forth saying Corequisite support, or learning support as we move throughout the day. My colleague, Dr. Theo Meek here, is probably familiar to a lot of you, but he's my newest colleague. And so I'm really happy that he's here on behalf of Student Ready Strategies as our Director of Strategic Implementation. He's going to be doing the bulk of our presentation today. And so I'm just kind of doing the setup and then the handoff to Dr. Pascal later on. So I want to thank Theo for being here with me today. Next, I want to just give you a little reminder about the framing that we provided back in December. This work that you're doing in Nevada is so important. You are truly creating student-ready colleges. You are not asking your students to be college-ready. You are creating that student-ready institution. You're dismantling barriers in placement in these course sequences and developmental education and all these other ways. The steps that you're taking today and throughout this whole professional development series and all the work you're doing as advisors around Corequisite support are huge steps towards building and using structures and supports that work for every student. So we're really happy to be here working alongside you, because we know that this path that you're on is truly leading to equitable outcomes in higher education in Nevada. And that you, as Vice Chancellor Abba said, advisors are actually the full key to this success. So we're really, really happy to be here. And I know you spent some time with your institutions, I think in February, reviewing the Corequisite learning support models being implemented at your own institution. So today we're going to spend some more time building on that scaffolding, kind of building the house around the scaffolding, talking about how you as an advisor understand learning support as a catalyst for equitable outcomes, and how you can talk about learning support with your students. We will also discuss the importance of sort of situating learning support inside of a framework for student success that includes a lot of the other high impact strategies that you're implementing at your institutions. And we're also going to talk about understanding student mindsets and what that means within all of this work, because achieving equity in our institution requires more of us. And just one little more reminder about from the last time we talked. So you might recall this quote that we presented to you, that this is really a guiding principle for us at Student Ready Strategy, something we think about all the time. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So I want you to think about that, write it down, take a snapshot of your screen. Just remember this phrase today as we go throughout this workshop. And in your life, as you think about and critically examine the systems within which we work and we live in our neighborhoods and where we play, I promise you that this quote is going to make you question a lot of things that you're used to. Things that have been really ingrained in us as normal practice, as even good practice, a best practice maybe. Things that have actually been designed, perfectly designed to harm more than help, even if that was unintentional in the design. So again, just keep this in your mind as we go throughout the day. And Dr. Meek is going to spend some time diving a level deeper than we did in December to talk about the risks that are inherent in the systems we've built and how you are already addressing these issues. So I don't want to spend any more time setting this up. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Meek.
Thank you, Vanessa. Again, I have had the opportunity to work with many of you in my roles at NG, as well as the University of Nevada, Reno, but very excited to be here and in my new role as Vanessa stated, as the Director of Strategic Implementation with Student Ready Strategies. And I'm really stoked to be here talking with you all about the details of implementing co-requisite support across NSHE's 7 teaching institutions. We believe, as Vice Chancellor Abba mentioned, we believe very strongly that advisors are the cornerstone to ensure that this work is carried out equitably, efficiently, and effectively. Over the next few moments, I'm going to reiterate some of what's been discussed before and really talk about how to communicate this out to students and possibly combat some of your own questions that you might have about what the learning or co-requisite support course looks like. But first, I want to just present something which I hope should be of no surprise to anyone, and it's what the traditional developmental education course sequence looks like within NSHE. And this is just one example where a series of developmental courses, non-credit bearing, purple boxes lead to a transfer level gateway course. In this case, it's Math 126 or pre-calculus. These sequences, these purple boxes, are representative of students taking 2, 3. In some of the NSHE institutions, it's historically been 4 or 5 developmental courses that you all know the perils of. They don't count towards graduation. They add time and significant financial burden onto the student's degree path before they're even eligible to enroll into a college level credit bearing course. And every single one of those arrows that you see represents a major point of attrition for many students. And perhaps most importantly, Hispanic, Black, and other historically marginalized students are most deeply affected by these long developmental education course sequences. In comparison to their white counterparts, we know that Black and Hispanic students take an average of 1 additional developmental course. That 1 additional developmental course is another 2, 3, 4 credits that students have to pay time and money taking before being able to enroll into the college level gateway course that they've signed up for. Additional studies have found that up to 2/3 of students of color placed into developmental education and their graduation rates are in the single digits. And this is true in the NSHE data that we examined, and it's true in the national data as well. And with NSHE being a majority minority system, the large proportion of students of color placing into developmental education is representative of thousands of students every year not going on to complete their degree or certificate of value. Placement complicates the problems with developmental education. And you see here some of the Cornerstone findings from a community college research center study, which found that utilizing high stakes placement exams like the ACT, the SAT, the AccuPlacer, it resulted in many students being misaligned and underplaced into their developmental courses. Scott Clayton, one of the chief researchers and out of CCRC, her predictive model in this research suggested that up to 1/4 of math enrollees and 1/3 of English enrollees that were enrolled in the developmental course could have passed their first gateway course with a B- or higher if given the opportunity to enroll, but simply placement measures alone barred them from getting access into that college level gateway course. And I will give a quick thanks to the Nevada community, because many of you are taking on the work of multiple measures. And in the co-requisite policy, there is an encouragement of scaling the use of multiple measures. And for many of the institutions, you all have begun this really important work that goes alongside of co-requisite support. Adding pre-support or pre-semester personalized learning paths like Alex or EdReady, additionally scaling the use of high school GPA and high school course taking patterns to place students, all results in more students having the opportunity to take the class that they've signed up for, that first college level gateway math or English course. We also know that courses and that the developmental courses and deficit-oriented language have very negative effects on the student psyche and may contribute to imposter syndrome, particularly for first-generation college students. And utilizing phrases like basic, pre-college, or the others that you see here reinforce the concept that students are, quote, not college ready. And the language implies that students are deficient in skills. And that's just simply not true. This type of language should be replaced with asset-oriented language, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But before we delve in to how co-requisite support contributes to the concept of student-ready colleges and promoting asset-mindedness, I want to first hear from you all about what you believe the risks of developmental education are. And so I am going to pull up right now a Slido poll. If you would all please pull up a smartphone or open a new tab in your web browser, and you will go to slido.com and you will use the event code NSHE, that's NSHE, and go ahead and just provide your answer to this question. If you have a smartphone on you, you can also open your camera and hover it over that QR code that you see in the top left, and it should open the link right there. And Vanessa,
drop that link into the chat box for you. Perfect. With the code.
Vanessa, if you wouldn't mind, there's no E in Slido, but it's that slido.com, and that event code is NSHE.
I apologize. I fixed it.
It does not follow traditional English grammar rules.
It sure does not. I think of it as slide-o when I think about it, so I apologize.
Thanks, Vanessa. So that's slido.com. The event code is NSHE, if you wouldn't mind. And I'll give a few moments to get everyone started. Just a quick forewarning, we have a few more of these Slido questions, so don't close out of Slido quite yet. Excellent. Take a look at some of what your colleagues are saying. Discouragement, poor self-esteem as they begin college, that they're behind, starting college behind, lots of feeling behind, a feeling of defeat, the feeling of defeat before students even begin college or have the opportunity to enroll in that first college level gateway course. Financial aid implications to prolonged coursework, absolutely. Extra financial burden. Stopping out due to the long path to the goal, absolutely. It could be the case that a two-year associate's, typically two-year associate's degree program, the student might have upwards of 3 semesters to take before they can even get into that Math 126. And if they are anything in the STEM fields, we know chem, physics have at least Math 126 is a prerequisite, if not some of the higher level, pre-calc 2, calculus. Absolutely. Feeling of defeat. Absolutely. These are all very valid.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of your nods to the mindset of the student and how these courses are making them feel inherently like not good enough, or they're in the courses that they're not ready for college and they shouldn't be there. So that's a theme that definitely came through in your responses.
I love this anecdote right here where one of your colleagues was a developmental education student and felt that they had a stereotype placed on them. I just want to echo what Vanessa said, in that it is no wonder that many of these students feel disconnected from campus before they even begin, because we've told them that the message historically has been you're not yet ready to college, I guess, but just take a few of these courses and you will be ready. You will be a real college student. So these are fabulous. Again, go ahead and please keep up that Slido, because we have a few more questions. And if you didn't get the opportunity to participate in this one, there will be a few others. So thank you for providing your insights. I agree with everything that has been said. And now we want to talk about what you already know and what's already been presented to you, but I just want to reiterate it for just a moment. Excuse me, shown here, the co-requisite model substantially shortens the path to completion. Think back to that 3-semester of developmental education course sequence I just presented. And now Math and English students across NSHE are going directly into a gateway course with or without that aligned support. On average, the co-requisite model triples the percentage of students getting through Gateway Math and English each year. And one of the most important findings from research across the nation is that the co-requisite model increases Gateway course completion for all students, regardless of their ACT level, but particularly for students with an ACT of a 14 or less, they are 11 times more likely to complete the Gateway course when given the opportunity to enroll directly in the Gateway course with co-requisite support versus the traditional developmental education model. And most importantly, the co-requisite model is the right thing to do for our historically marginalized students. Again, every student population benefits from the co-requisite model, and that is particularly true for our Black and Hispanic students, whose rates of completing the Gateway course nearly double. You see here, Black students, the Black student completion rate went from 36, jumped up to 70%. And for our Hispanic students, 46 to 75%. There are gains across every student subpopulation that's been studied in the co-requisite model. And for the skeptics out there, I will just reiterate the fact that research across the nation has yet to show that any student population fares better in traditional developmental education. In every student subpopulation studied, be it first-generation students, students with an ACT of less than 13, adult students, students of color, every single student population fares better when given the opportunity to take Gateway Math and English, enroll directly in Gateway Mathematics and Gateway English courses.
Yeah,
Vanessa.
Will you advance your slide?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem.
Theo's doing a lot. He's doing the presentation and the slide advancements.
Absolutely. So I just want to confirm, you are looking at the reflection question now, right?
Correct.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa. Now, knowing this, I would like you all to again reflect on a question, a similar question being asked, and that is, what are the risks to a student who is placed in the gateway course or gateway course with aligned support?
We are looking at the last reflection question.
Oh boy. Okay, let's see how I did that, because I am looking at okay, let me try to go back and unshare and reshare. Thanks, Vanessa.
You're welcome. It probably has something to do with going out to look at Slido. No big deal.
That's a great point. Okay, so we saw the co-requisite slide. Are we looking at the co-rec slide?
Nope.
Okay, good. Excellent. We're in really good shape. Slide change by chance?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, good. So now we're looking at the bar graphs, right? Okay, perfect. Well, now we know one of the challenges of Slido Switcher for any of you using that for your presentations. So because you all didn't get to see the information that I was presenting, let me just kind of reiterate that the findings for those for Black students and Hispanic students and Asian students and that includes all those student subpopulations, every student population that we've looked at. Students fare better in the co-requisite model, and it has a lot to do with those non-cognitives that we've taught, that you all shared in your discussions or in your reflection questions. So now let's try this again, and you should now be asked what the risks are to students who are placed into a gateway course or a gateway course with aligned support, so a co-requisite course. What do you all believe are some of the greatest risks? In the developmental course questions, you all cited feelings of underpreparedness, feeling demotivated. What do you think are some of the risks to students who are placed into the gateway course or gateway course with aligned support?
Some good thoughts here. Perhaps overwhelmed. Students may feel overwhelmed. Impact financial aid eligibility. Nerves.
Seeing some financial aid concerns, possibly too much information at once. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Additional units may create confusion, says someone in the chat box. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. See some concerns as an advisor, a student who would perhaps before placed in Math 91, now placing in a Math 120. That just seems
advanced.
Advanced.
Yeah. Heavy impact on the GPA if they don't pass.
Absolutely. These are great. Keep them coming.
Yeah, keep them coming. I'm interested in this idea about this 5-credit course making them feel behind of their graduation date. Mm-hmm. And thinking about students who, I mean, personally, I'm a first generation college student, and literally I had no concept of what credits meant or what they were, or like taking 5 and what that would do for my progress or anything like that. So sometimes I think as higher education professionals, we might have thoughts about the number of credits that a student might have to take and how they might feel about that. But really having that conversation even with yourself to think, well, are they seeing it this way? Are they concerned about those 5 credits, or is that something that I'm thinking? and how students understand credit taking and progression is important.
So, see some questions on if support will be offered, and absolutely there is no institution across NC that is just pushing their students who would typically place into math 91, 92, 95, 96. There is no institution that is placing them into a gateway course without support. All of those students are getting that additional 1 to 3 credits of support.
I also just want to give you guys kudos. I love how much interaction we're getting on these Slidos. This input is fantastic. Really good reflection.
Yeah. And Renee, I'm sure, is probably taking a few notes as well about the grave concerns with financial aid, and perhaps Renee, as we're closing up, if you could just give a few comments, or if you want to respond to a few of the comments now.
Sure. So I was actually just going to type something into the chat regarding actually getting the word out to students and letting them understand. We have some great resources created by Great Basin College for communicating out with the campus, including to students. So I'll hit that in the chat. In regards to financial aid, I think that there is some misinformation out there. So for those of you who are familiar with before Math 95, 96, as you know, those courses were covered by federal financial aid. And there was a limit of 30 credits of remedial that can be taken that comes from the federal regulations, but nevertheless, those courses are funded with federal student aid. And so that remains the same with the co-requisite model. Both, of course, the college level course is funded, but also so are any of the support credits that the student may be enrolled in. In terms of the Millennium Scholarship, I know there's been a lot of concern expressed regarding Millennium Scholarship eligibility. And again, the treatment of the co-rec portion, if it's numbered below 100, is going to be the same as a 95 or a 96 has been in the past. So it does continue to count towards the student's enrollment level, which is required for funding. And I'll give some more details at our next convening, which will do a little bit more of a full kind of update on policy and those types of things. But do know for the time being that students are not going to be disadvantaged by this model in terms of financial aid. They're actually a little better off because there are fewer credits that aren't going to be fundable in Millennium than there would have necessarily been in the past on that, particularly on that long path that Theo showed at the beginning. Do you think that's good enough for now, Theo, or?
Absolutely. And just to, Renee gave a perfect plug to what the April presentation will look like, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But absolutely, these concerns that you're sharing, I appreciate you sharing them all. If you don't know, Assistant Vice Chancellor Davis is extremely familiar with financial aid. She comes from the financial aid world at TMCC and now does many of the state aid administration for things like SSOG, Millennium Scholarship, and things like that. So we're fortunate to have a really deeply aligned content expert of our own here. Excellent. Oops, don't want that quite yet. All right, I'm going to try this again. We're going to move to my next slide. Did it move for all of you? Yay! I did absolutely everything exactly the same, so I have no idea what's different, but we'll just call it a Friday. For many of the concerns that you brought up, they're absolutely valid. Students will always have a possibility of failure. That is true in a developmental education course sequence. It's true in a co-requisite model, and it's true in a 400 level discipline-specific course that the students are going to be taking. But one of the most important things that when we conceptualize the idea of a co-requisite support implementation is that it is a risk mitigation effort. We are mitigating the risks associated with development, with academic support getting the student into the gateway course. But in addition to a risk mitigation responsibility and effort, it's also an anti-racism reform. And we'll talk a little bit about both of those. With the gateway course, with or without the aligned support, we are mitigating the risks of higher costs, time to degree, exhausting financial aid, reducing the likelihood, and we are reducing the likelihood that students will be able to enroll directly and will be able to enroll into that gateway course. There is a higher likelihood of attrition associated with developmental education courses, and as Renee mentioned, the concerns with actually exhausting some of the financial aid. I also want to just pause for a moment here and say that I saw a few concerns about doubling up on the co-requisites in the first semester. And I know Renee will probably bring this up in greater detail in April, but the policy has been modified such that students will need to complete Gateway Math and English within the first year of enrollment, as opposed to within the first semester. So students do not and probably should not be co-recking if needed in both the math and English courses in the first semester. Many of the institutions have expressed a priority in providing the student access to the co-requisite English course in the first semester and then the co-requisite math course in the second semester. And one of the greatest benefits with that is that we still allow the student to take the other courses that are aligned to their program of study, as opposed to just mathematics and just English. So, yes, students have the risk of failing a gateway course. Yes, they have the risk of failing the co-requisite support course. They also run these exact same risks in developmental education with a number of compounding factors. And I think in the terms of a risk mitigation effort, it is our responsibility as higher education professionals to mitigate the risks for students, just the same as we do with our fellow staff members. For those of you that are parents, we do the same for our children, it's for our family members. This is all about mitigating the risk that we know students have undergone historically in those traditional remediation sequences. And again, take it back to that systems thinking quote that Vanessa talked about earlier. A system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. If we design an equitable, support-driven curriculum that lifts students up in a gateway course with learning support, we will get the results that reflect that sort of dedication to our students. And remember, the risk mitigation is also a proven anti-racism effort, because we are lessening the risks for students who have historically been marginalized by developmental education. The risks of allowing Black and Latinx students into the gateway course with support are far less than the risks of letting them spiral in an ineffective developmental education course sequence, as we've done in the past. While we know that with co-requisite support, all students fare better, again, for the 5th time I'm telling you all, the greatest gains are for students who deserve our most intentional time and efforts. It's Black, Latinx, Indigenous students, and first-generation students, and students who have been historically marginalized by developmental education. Some of you before this presentation have asked how to describe the learning support to students, and it's important, and we saw this a little bit in the Q&A, which I am really appreciative of, but it's important to combat your own perception of deficit-mindedness when advising students who are placed into learning support. Learning support is not a punishment, it is not a penalty, it is not an indication of whether they are college ready or college material or not. And this is a complete departure from the way that we as a nation have viewed the purpose of developmental education. Most importantly, learning support is not an indication of whether the student has the ability or aptitude to learn. It is not our responsibility to define that. It's the student's responsibility to take on their own ability and aptitude to learn. Learning support is an opportunity or a benefit for students. It's an indication that they are absolutely prepared, as their admission letter states, they are prepared for college and they are prepared to take college level coursework. Co-requisite support works because it's a deeper applied learning experience where Particularly in math, abstract concepts are partnered with real-world contextualized examples that make sense to students. Students are learning at the time that they're learning some of the complex materials associated with something like pre-calculus or Math 120. They are learning real-world contextualized examples of how this looks for themselves in their daily use of math, whether it's calculating interest rates and discounts, interest rates on credit cards, or student loans or discounts at the store. It's contextualizing it with financial literacy. So the student is learning financial literacy skills about maybe purchasing a home at the same time that they're learning about some of these math fundamentals. And I will say that the math faculty, and I was privy to a lot of the conversations in my role with NSHE, and I will say that the math and English faculty are crazy dedicated to making sure that this information is contextualized to the students so that it makes sense for them. Today, and for what feels like years, we have spent a lot of time talking about the benefits of co-requisite support and how great it is. And don't get me wrong, it is great. It is what I did my dissertation on. I can assure you that it is great. And I can assure you that it's the right thing to do for our students. But one very hard lesson that I learned when I was director of advising at UNR is that nothing, absolutely nothing, works in a silo. And this is true of reform as well. Co-requisite support is not a silver bullet. Retention will not skyrocket to 100%, and graduation rates are not going to jump 20 points overnight. This is exceptionally hard work that the NSHE Co-Requisite Implementation Task Force and many of you all are undergoing. And the successes of co-requisite support are only maximized when they're done in concert with a number of integrated student success programs that we'll talk about. Some of the program, we'll talk about each of these strategies, and many of you will have familiarity with some of these. But the big one, or one of the big ones, is multiple measures for placement. And we've talked about that either using EdReady or ALEX, the idea of using high school GPA and course taking patterns, looking at what the last grade that the student took in their high school coursework is, directed self-placement, which some of our English faculty, I know, especially at Nevada State College, have piloted for quite some time. These types of ideas attribute to greater success in the co-requisite model because they are providing more accurate predictors of who can go into who should go into the gateway course and who should go into the gateway course with support. Additionally, mathematics pathways, the idea that you are taking a math course that is contextualized and aligned with your program of study. So not everyone needs college algebra, not everyone needs algebra foundations. Perhaps for some of our nursing or education programs or liberal arts programs and humanities, a statistics pathway makes more sense, or a quantitative reasoning path makes more sense. English pathways, very similar, that they are taking English courses that make sense to the outcomes of what their degree requires. The ability to write and speak effectively, the ability to synthesize very complex information and create position papers, things like that. Meta majors, and I just want to give a quick shout out to CSN for their really robust implementation of meta majors. The idea of allowing students the opportunity to flex in their major. So students might be in a meta major that is aligned with education, where they may take a few education courses before ultimately determining if they want to do secondary education or elementary education or English as a secondary language education. The idea that we are providing a safe opportunity for students to explore so that they don't end up like me, changing my major 5 times in my undergraduate degree and being behind every single time I did that. Bridge programs, shout out here to programs like the Nevada Fit program at UNR, where it's a rigorous academic boot camp that students have the opportunity to fail in a safe place, and they have the opportunity to experience rigorous coursework in a safe place. Jumpstart programs that many of our community colleges have, wonderful programs that give the opportunity for students to jumpstart their post-secondary education. by taking math and English courses in semesters before their first fall semester as an undergraduate student. Contextualized curriculum, we've talked a lot about the idea that they are using real world examples. And then, of course, career-aligned advising. So making sure that early on in the student's program, they are learning and they are learning what their degree, or I'm sorry, what their career requires, and that advising is aligning support for that to prepare the student early on so that they know. Vanessa and I were joking about the example that if you don't like blood, maybe nursing isn't the right career for you before you learn that in your clinical rotations 3 years down the road. So very quickly, just one last Slido question before I pass it off to Vanessa. How many of these strategies in your institution is your institution incorporating? And if there are any strategies that you want to explore, go ahead and put those in the chat. But how many of these strategies is your institution incorporating? And this is the last Slido question. So if you would like to close it after responding, you are more than welcome to. But again, I encourage you to put, yes, Vanessa.
Yeah, will you pull back up the list so they can see all the strategies so they can count them?
Absolutely. Yes. Give me a second to figure out how to do that.
You did. It's there. You did great.
Thank you. Multiple measures for placement, math pathways, English pathways, meta majors, bridge programs, contextualized learning, career advising.
And if you have any other strategies that you are really proud of that your institution's working on, feel free to throw those in the chat box. We'd love to hear about what you're doing. The reason that we included these is because these are directly aligned to Corequisite support. They go hand in hand with that idea of math and English in the first year and other things that support student learning around math and English gateway courses. 3 or 4 is our big winner so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to see that over 50% of the advisors have identified 3 or 4 of these aligned strategies that your institution is incorporating, and 75% of people that have responded so far, 3 or more. So many of you are taking on 5 or more of these aligned strategies, which is fabulous.
That's amazing.
Excellent.
Going back to my original remarks, y'all are doing amazing work.
Well, with that, I would like to pass it back to Vanessa to really think about growth mindset, and she's going to talk a lot about how what we've shared will attribute to you being able to communicate more effectively with your students. So, Vanessa, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Theo. And thank you for managing all that while presenting and moving slides. You're great. So I just want to go back to what Theo mentioned earlier, that, this idea of learning support is fantastic. And we're so excited that you're doing it, and your institutions are going to be so good with learning support in place. But it is not, the only silver bullet. So even if you implemented learning support plus all of the strategies that he went over, that still might not get us the results that we want, which is really developing this anti-racist system where more students of color, poverty-affected students, older students, Pell-eligible students are graduating from our institutions with a credential of value or a degree. And you also saw in what Theo presented that when we look at Corequisite support and the outcomes from it, you see about 70, 80, 90% of students get through the Corequisite and move on to the subsequent course in their sequence. So there's still about 20 to 30% of those students who don't pass the gateway course with learning support. And you all identified that as one of the risks, right? This idea that they're going to fail, which is inherent in, whatever students are doing in college. However, our good friend and colleague, Tristan Denley, Dr. Tristan Denley he was at Tennessee, now he's in Georgia. And he wanted to understand what was going on with that 20 to 30% of students that that aren't getting through that learning support course. And he wanted to know, how do we better support them? How do we make sure that they're getting through that course? And in his findings, he discovered that students who failed that co-requisite support, their learning support course, were failing all of their courses, or almost all of their courses. And so this led him to the conclusion, which I agree with, that academic readiness is not really the issue at hand here. We are dealing with a whole student, a whole person, right? We're dealing with people just like us. And we have to connect with that whole student to help them succeed. And advisors, you are in the perfect position to be doing this, to help them through this. So this is where the concept that Motivate Lab here, they ended up working with Georgia on some of this work, but they've developed the Mindset GPS. And this team of researchers at the University of Virginia really put together these 3 items that they believe really help a student feel connected to the institution. So one of those is a student's growth mindset. I'm sure you've all heard of this, right? The idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset, but just a really quick example of that, right? Well, let me go back. I want to say first that what I'm showing you here, this growth mindset, purpose, and sense of belongingness, that's the GPS. These are things that we aren't asking a student to change everything about themselves. We're not asking a student to do this work on their own, or actually even know that this is happening, that they are growing their mindset, they're growing their sense of purpose and their sense of social belongingness. This is something that we can do with them, for them, and surround them with, so that they feel better connected to the institution and they're more confident in the way that they can approach things. So let me go back to the growth mindset piece. So we really want them to think about things like, instead of thinking, I can't do math, I am bad at math, I am not a math person. We want them to get to the point where they're thinking, I can learn math. It is something that I don't know right now, but maybe in 3 weeks after we get through this unit, I will be able to do that problem. And it's something that I think that we all do as humans, right? We interact with people and we're like, oh yeah, me neither. I'm not a math person. And I would say that about myself. I say things like this to Theo all the time. I'm not great at statistics. I'm not a statistics person. But when I think about it, what we really need to say to students is, you know, I didn't think I was great at statistics, but I went to my class, my professor really helped me and I learned a lot. And now I'm able to do a lot of that work. So really helping them change their mindset from fixed to growing. And then the sense of purpose is something that Theo mentioned earlier around contextualized curriculum. We want students to feel a sense of purpose, that they are at this institution for a reason, and recognize what that is. Recognize the purpose in the courses that they're taking. An example of this would be in an English course, helping them to reflect on how they might use this in a future career, how this essay writing that they're doing could then be turned into maybe a blog that they're already writing, making those practical applications to show students that their purpose is real in this class. And then finally, the sense of belongingness. This is actually something someone mentioned earlier, and I loved it. I wrote it down. The developmental courses directly affect a student's sense of belongingness at the institution, because you're essentially saying to them, you don't belong here, right? You're not college ready. So this idea of learning support really does help this sense of belongingness at the institution. We want them to connect to the campus and with you as advisors, with faculty and staff and with their peers. So having, you know, their organizations on campus, all of that contributes to a sense of social belonging. And I'll tell you what else does. The cohorting in the co-requisite model. So when you put students into a smaller course and they're really working on these concepts together and they're learning and they're growing their growth mindset together, they develop this cohort. And this cohort does develop their sense of social belonging. And I know Cynthia, Dr. Pascal, is going to go into a lot of these concepts more in depth later and really talk about asset-based learning. But I wanted to kind of provide this idea to you. And if you want to learn more about this, Motivate Lab has tons of resources out there on their website and a lot of research that you can go out and check out. And so this is where we want to leave you. First of all, remember that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. And the work that you're doing to change the system is a huge undertaking. It's a really giant step towards creating that equitable system of higher education that we're searching for, and society as a whole. But I just leave you with this quote. This is Dr. Estella Ben-Simone from USC. She is the director at the Race and Equity Center there, and she is a personal hero of mine. She does say that this structural change isn't enough. We have to think about power dynamics in classrooms and in the way we work with our students, barriers in the way that we talk to students, talk about students, and talk with students and teach them, right? These pedagogical barriers. And then the ingrained mindsets that students come to us with, that they can't do it, or they're not ready, or they're not good enough. And how do we address all of those things to really get to an anti-racist, equitable system of higher education? So I really hope that this feels like a call to action. We're going to transition right now into a short question and answer session. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and then we'll address those. And we're going to ask Dr. Pascal to start preparing her slides or being ready to step up. But even questions that Renee can answer would be perfectly fine. If you have any structural questions about the way NG is doing things, we can answer those as well. So feel free to take time and put those in there. And thank you so much for all of your participation. We loved all the responses in the Slido. It was really helpful. And I think will help NG as they develop what's going to happen in April.
So go ahead and use that question and answer piece if you have anything that you would like to ask us.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
I want to give a quick shout out to, let me pull up the comment very quick. One moment, where was it? To Diane. She says that I tell my students that it is not, we're talking about math preparation and growth mindset, that it is not hereditary, as many of them say, because their parents were bad at math, or I have to be bad at math too. So I love the idea of breaking down that idea that that it is absolutely not hereditary. Amy asks, will any of the mindset development be included in the learning support courses by faculty who teach the courses? And Renee, I think I will pass it off to you to answer that.
Thanks, Theo. I was just getting ready to chat you and say I have some exciting information to share. So since I got re-involved with the Corequisite implementation project at the beginning of this year, I've been attending each and every one of the Corec professional development sessions for math and for English. And I can happily report that both the math and English faculty, and I even think the math faculty to more of a degree, are all talking about growth mindset, how to incorporate these types of things into the classroom. I mean, there's lots of focus on group work, which you don't really necessarily think of as happening in the math classroom. I mean, there are all kinds of great ideas that they're sharing with each other. And many of the presenters have actually been from within the NC system. So folks who've already been piloting their co-rec courses, and they've been sharing what they've been learning along the way. And it's really apparent to me that our faculty are really embracing the concept of teaching the holistic student, rather than just, okay, here's what you need to know about math. So it's a much bigger reform than just kind of shuffling around what we used to do into a different numbering scheme. It's a real change at the root level with how the concept of teaching is being looked at and how it's being carried out. So I'm just delighted to report that, and I'm so glad that I've been attending those sessions, because I'm learning a lot about what our faculty are doing to change the way students are taught, so that it's effective for a broader range of students.
That's amazing, and really, really supports everything that we've been talking about here. So embedding that into the advising, and what we're going to talk about soon with Dr. Pascal is going to be perfect. So we do have a question, and I'm going to, and whoever wants to address it can. Are the co-rec courses covered by the Millennium Scholarship? Possibly, Renee. Yeah.
Yes. So, and I also see a chat question I can answer too, so I'll get to that in a second. In regards to the Millennium Scholarship, so I don't want to get too complicated in this time because I really think it's important to move on to the content with our wonderful presenter. But I can tell you that they're essentially treated the same way that a 95 or 96 has been treated. So in any case, the credits all count towards that minimum enrollment level. And in the case of math, where you have the split out between the 20 and 120, for example, the 120 is funded, the 20 is not funded, but it still counts towards the minimum enrollment level. And I promise I'm going to give you some detail and some examples in the April presentation. I've already got that planned. So stay tuned for more information, but you can also reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and you can also reach out to me individually if you want a more specific explanation. So thanks for that question.
Renee, we have one more question. Any plans by NCHI to do periodic professional development for Gateway course instructors on skills they need to support students in their class?
Well, we have been doing it, and for the lead up to fall, there's a total, including these advising segments, total of 24 professional development. So out of that 24, 10 are English, 9 are math. And so we added on, in fact, when we felt like there was some feedback coming from the English faculty that they still had a need that wasn't being met by the sessions we had planned. So now we're adding one. At this time going forward, you're probably wondering about after fall implementation. And yes, the work of the work of the co-requisite implementation task force is kind of ongoing in nature, and they built into their plans things to follow up on, such as assessment. And so, yeah, so it really is going to be an ongoing process. And Theo probably has shared with you in the past that, you know, the system office hasn't really gotten involved until now in professional development, but we definitely have a commitment to making sure this continues, because we know that it's not, okay, we're in fall, it's done, the implementation is over. It's an ongoing kind of development, and things probably won't be perfect in fall. And so there will be the continued discussion, how do we constantly improve this model for our students? So definitely, yes, they're happening, and they will continue to happen in the future.
Fantastic, thank you. Theo, are we on time? Do we need to move forward? Are we doing breaks? What are we doing?
We are on time. We are doing great. And I think we're good to pass it along.
All right, everybody, that's my cue. So my name is Cynthia Pascal, and I'm in a unique position. I have been in the virtual advising environment for over 10 years. So while the pandemic definitely changed a lot of people's lives, for me, it wasn't that big of an adjustment. It just meant I got to work from home versus working in my office space. So today I'm going to teach you some of the things I've learned along the way, and we're going to kind of sit crooked and talk straight about some pretty difficult subjects. So this is going to be an interactive conversation. So I'm hoping some people will feel like interacting. You guys did great on Slido. So that gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll be interactive with me as well. So I just really appreciate all y'all who are here. So we're going to be talking about embedding equity into pandemic and virtual advisings. And advising is teaching, so we have to talk about your learning outcomes. Well, first of all, the first thing I'm going to really focus on is the historical practices that made this such a hot topic, right? There's policies, there's procedures, and the resources and services that were created long time ago. And for some reason, we have decided not to change them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and really get out of that fixed mindset. We're going to examine how those burdens, responsibilities, power, and privilege are distributed differently for different people. And I fully recognize I'm a 40-year-old white woman, so I'm only going to be giving you one perspective. And last but not least, we're going to talk about socially just design and how it can be applied to virtual advising practices to close the equity gap. So we're really going from that college-ready mindset to that student-ready mindset. So this is that participation part that I just planted the seed about. And I'm hoping you'll have this honest conversation with me. And that is, who were colleges and universities created for? When you think about a college and university, who was it created for? Feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to come off mute if that's allowed. But really, when you think of the student that colleges and universities was created for, who are you thinking about? And I'm seeing the chat starting to light up, which is good news for me. White males, affluent white males, rich white men, wealthy white men, everyone. And I'm going to give you my big fat biased opinion. You're welcome. I'm going to say it was cis men. You know, I'm going to say it was cis white men who, I'm thinking Cambridge, right? I'm thinking about where our actual regalia comes from, is these big robes that have velvet on the side that show how important you are based on what type of sleeves you have. And so our systems and structures were really created for a very specific group of people. And these were often created for firstborn sons. These were often created for people, again, who had money or titles. The upper class in the US, the sons of white landowners, that's very specific as well. Landowner was a big part of it, right? So you have to have land rights, you have to have voting rights, all kinds of things that we really, a lot of us take for granted, or at least I'm going to use I statements, I take for granted. So when we're thinking about how colleges were created and how kind of advising came as a natural extension to colleges, we're thinking about a very different experience than what we're seeing today. So today's students look a little bit different, right? This information was provided by the American Council of Higher Education on Race and Ethnicity in U.S. undergraduates. And the pretty graphic was from Higher Learning Advocates, and I like to give credit where credit's due. But really, we're looking at 52% of this population being white, and it's not gender specific. But then the rest of the population, 48%, does not, we know for a fact, does not fit that model that we just shared, right? So we have this thing where we have the system and structure that we're historically working with and our actual demographics. So as we're thinking about this conversation today, I want you to push yourself back and further beyond what you know, and think about what might you know in theory, and then also what you've learned recently, and also what can we change? Today's college student is also an adult learner. So some of you might have thought, when you're saying that, I don't know why they keep talking about white men. I think about 18-year-olds. I think about 19-year-olds. I think about high school graduates. That's true. But 37% of our students are over the age of 25. And they're part-time students. So we're always at my institution for many, many years, and I worked at proprietary before working at community colleges, we said 15 to finish. If you do 15 credit hours, you will finish this degree in 2 years and then go off to your dream job or transfer institution or whatever your end goal was. But the reality is a 2-year degree is not a 2-year degree anymore. And a 4-year degree is not a 4-year degree anymore, because 40% of our students, guess what, are not taking the required credits. Now that might be for a couple of different reasons. So we were talking about that a little bit in the last presentation. Things come up, right? You know, maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're working multiple jobs. Maybe you were laid off during the pandemic And all of a sudden, you don't have cash in your pocket, but you still have all of your responsibilities. So we come in with these assumptions that students are who take part-time courses maybe aren't as dedicated. And that might not be true. It's just that they have other responsibilities they have to balance. And 34% of them are first generation students. And if you are a student who is coming from first generation, chances are you don't know how to navigate our systems that were created for affluent white men who are cisgendered, and all the policies and procedures are geared to them. So that being said, that starts to unpack what we historically know and what we know today, right? But there's more. Of the students who will receive grants and federal financial aid and Pell Grants, many of them are from historically underrepresented groups. So these are the people, when we get data, a lot of these people fall into that asterisk, right? We got to look beyond those asterisks and really look about the student experience from each perspective. So not just our Black or Latinx students, but what about our Indigenous students? And so really picking it apart in a different way, in a way that maybe we have never had to look at, in a way that might not be required by our state. As a state institution, they require me to do certain metrics. Well, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I don't go above and beyond the call of duty. This is asking us to push beyond what is expected and broaden our expectations. Now, today's student also has something that I know we are familiar with, but if I didn't talk about it, I would be remiss. Today's students are experiencing things that we did not have to experience from a student lens, and that is a pandemic. Yesterday marked a year for the pandemic being announced, and casually announced, might I add. And then the next day, quarantine started. So today is the year anniversary of quarantine starting in many states. And I don't know if you remember this, the first day of quarantine, people started, there was uncertainty, right? Everybody rushed to the stores, got all the toilet paper they could get, got all the hand sanitizer they could get, got all the food they can get. And all of a sudden, everybody, no matter what your socioeconomic demographics, were in the same boat. They were under-resourced, right? And what does that bring up when you're under-resourced? Fear, anxiety. Am I going to have enough? When am I going to get enough? When is this going to be accessible to me? On top of that, if I go outside, am I at risk? Is my health at risk? Or maybe I'm not a candidate who's going to get really hurt from COVID-19, but my partner is. They also, once they got over that initial shock and sticker price that comes with going into a pandemic, because a lot of people hiked up their prices, then it was like, well, how do I transition to this virtual world? All my classes just went remote. I don't know what that means. And my instructor sure doesn't know what that means. And they're making stuff up overnight, right? We had like 2 days to figure out how to be fully online. And so then you have this part where it's like, well, I'm expected to know how to use a computer, but I don't, not like this. I'm expected to have a certain amount of bandwidth. I'm expected to be able to use my own computer whenever I want, but I might be sharing it with multiple people in the house, including family members who are streaming movies and video games. And so all of a sudden, what we're put into this situation, we're all becoming disadvantaged, right? And so we really have to recognize that some of these gaps existed before. Don't get me wrong, but a pandemic exacerbates these gaps. So students who are already struggling or already maybe at risk because of certain factors are now being hit 2, 3, 4 times harder. On top of that, many students lost their jobs. I know my partner, for instance, lost his job for 13 weeks. We didn't get his first unemployment check till 17 weeks into the pandemic. So there was this idea that help is on the way, but it wasn't timely help. And so we really need to think about that. Trauma is still with many of our students. And when we talk about things from the equity lens, we can't act like that trauma is not there or that it's gone away. Sure, there's vaccines. That's great news. I haven't been called to get mine yet. And so I assume many of our students have either. So while I get it, we're in a good place, we're in a better place, we're not there yet. And then on top of that, and again, spoiler alert, 40-year-old white woman, we have to talk about the impact of racism on mental health. Now, racism is one of America's great shames, right? It's something that's been there the whole time. We didn't have to tell you about it. You kind of knew in the back of your head it was there, but it has been brought to a different height because of police brutality, because of systemic issues that are coming out in voting laws, because of elections, right? And so we're seeing this stuff and it's bubbling up. And what it does is it really does a number on students of color. And it makes them have to deal with different situations in a different light. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. On top of that, then you get coping skills like race lighting. And so you have to not only work with students who are going through these traumas that are real, they're not imagined traumas, they're real, and who are all of a sudden telling themselves, I'm not enough. Or they're all going to find out that I'm not well, or they're all going to find out I don't have X, Y, and Z. And especially when we're talking about people who just got placed into developmental classes, they're just rubber stamps. I knew it. I knew it. And so I did want to talk to you about that because it would be unfair to today's students if we didn't talk about that. So knowing that that's what our today's students are like, why are we not embracing change? And I really, really, really enjoyed this quote in an article. And I did make this PowerPoint available, and in the comments, it actually has the link. But remedial classes can take a number of semesters for students. And it might be information that they have to rehash over and over again. And it might be for a variety of reasons. It might be that they had a K through 12 experience that wasn't equitable. It might be that it's been 10 years since they've been in college and they just don't remember it. If you ask me to do an algebra problem right now, guess what? It's not going to go well. Unless it's specifically about my grocery shopping and bills, it's not going to go well. And so really, the majority of students need these remedial classes, but do they? Or do they need a system that is designed for them? Designed for them today, not designed for their fathers, right? And so that's where I'm going to push you again to kind of expand and get uncomfortable with those thoughts. So what we're really talking about and what was shared earlier is that growth mindset, right? Not that fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is it's black or it's white. You meet the scores or you don't meet the scores. You can get into this selective program, you can't get into this selective program. And it's really based on old ideas. The shifting paradigm, shifting the narrative is, what would it look like if we created a system set up for students, and being laser focused on their success? And so when we talk about a student-ready college, we're going to talk about people who are willing to support all students and meet where they are, not where we wish they were when they got here. How many times have you said this yourself? And I've said it to myself many times. So I'm not the only one, or I'm not guilty. Is, man, I wish their high school would have just taught them math, taught them how to write a basic sentence. Who taught this student how to cite work, or format work, or use Comic Sans as a font, like little things. I see that all the time. Or even how they write emails and address me. Hey, Miss Pascal, I'm like, or hey, Miss P, and I'm like, okay, I'll take it, but what about hello, Cynthia, or hello, Dr. Pascal, or hello, Professor, not hey. And that's an informality, and I'm okay with that. But when you go to your boss and say, hey, it sets tones, right? And so what would it look like if we meet them where they're at and show them the way and understand their needs? As it was shared earlier, their needs very much so aren't academic. When students first called us during the pandemic, they weren't calling and saying, you know what I need? Really great academic advising. Now they need really great academic advising, don't get me wrong, but they needed Wi-Fi, they needed financial aid, they needed supports, they needed tutoring, they needed to figure out how to save things in PDFs or how to open a PDF. So we need to understand that how something presents itself isn't due to a lack of ability to understand. It's lack of access to information or access to the right person to teach them that information. And we need to understand that supports need to be put in place to support all students. And that's what we were talking about in the last session, looking at the asset base and saying, you know what, you're doing great here. Let's get you some more support here. You're struggling here. Let's get you these supports, and putting them at the right time, not flooding them just in orientation. Orientations are great. You're only going to remember one thing, and that is, how do I get into my classes? That's really what students want to take out of most orientations. In my experience, how we do orientation in my school, I should have put that in a box. But really, you know, it's a broader thing. It's giving those nuggets when it's relevant and when it's culturally relevant too. So again, not after a crisis, but before a crisis. And it values diversity. Diversity not only of its students, but of its faculty and staff. And that can be from age, that can be gender, that can be backgrounds, that can be degrees, really valuing diversity. That can be, again, and you see this at a lot of institutions, you know, you don't have to be have a doctorate to have expertise, right? And so valuing that diversity and creating a welcoming, safe environment that's intentional. You'll notice on my heading, I put my pronouns. My pronouns are traditional female pronouns, she, her, hers. They're my personal pronouns, and I put them up there, not because I need you to know that, it's because I need my students who are LGBTIQA to know that I'm a safe person to be around, and it's okay to be themselves around me. And my dreamers in the background, I need them to know I'm not gonna be all of a sudden reporting them to ICE. You know, I'm a safe place to be, start a conversation. Now it's my job to keep the rapport, but I'm gonna make it welcoming. And we need to recognize our shortcomings. I make mistakes every day, some bigger than others. And my institution makes mistakes every day, some bigger than others. But it's what we do with those mistakes that either points us in the right direction or gets us further and further and further away from being student ready and student centered. So the big question is, how do I become a student ready advisor? Well, first you obviously need a cape. Just kidding. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. But you need to lead with empathy. And what does that mean, right? Leading with empathy. It means putting yourself in student shoes. You might not have to understand their situation. You might not have to agree with their situation, but you have to take it from their perspective and not your perspective. And sometimes that means listening. And not listening to what you want to hear so that you can respond, but listening. I'm really struggling in math. It's really hard. You know, I've been working 40 hours a week. My kid is doing Zoom classes and I just can't pass this math class. And so what I'm hearing isn't that there's like necessarily an academic issue. I'm hearing there's some other stuff. And if I was just to prescribe, prescriptive advising is a very helpful tool. It works when it works, especially for scheduling, but advising is teaching. So you really do have to listen to understand, not to be understood. St. Francis prayer. And you got to advocate. Stuff is going to be wrong in your system, or it's going to be a black and white policy and you're going to have a student who's in the gray. So you need to advocate for them. You need to guide them. You need to find the loophole. And to do that, sometimes you need to do the research. What's going on at the global scale? What's going on at the local scale? What's going on at your institution? And who's the person who owns that? This morning, I had a student who's really upset. He's sent to the debt collectors, and he's a frontline worker. He's a frontline medical worker in the time of COVID. But our government in Virginia said, listen, we'll give you 3-month grace period and that's it. And so I had to research not what webpage he had to go to that was going to give him a generic email that was like the controller's office at nvcc.edu. No, I had to find out it was Bridget. And it took me some research to find out it was Bridget and creative Googling to find out it was Bridget. And so that's part of what it is. It's not just, it's looking at big pictures, but also looking at the individual. And then guide and connect those students as necessary. And a lot of times, guess what? The answer is still going to be the same. You know, you're going to have to break it to students gently. That same student, I had to break it to him that regretfully, the law is the law here in at Virginia, and I can't call the credit bureau and just say, fix his credit score, everything's fine. We don't want to hold him accountable because of a pandemic, even though that's what was in my head and in my heart. And I'm an empath based on strength finders. So I had to relay that news, but then I put a but. I can't help you with this, but I can help you find food resources, electricity resources, housing resources, so you can divert your money from paying for those things to paying off this debt so we can get this debt taken care of quickly. So that's where you have to bring in your creativity, right? And your student ready part. Yes, the policy is black and white, but, and last but not least, be that loop closer. So after a student panics, and I'm going to go back to that voice of reason because I noticed I skipped it. Student panics, the faculty did me dirty because of X, Y, Z. And you're like, it is in the syllabus, but thank you. That was not a make-believe thing. This is a college expectation. Rather saying that with empathy, but then handing them off to the resource and making sure that they actually get connected. So you just referred them back to their faculty to have this conversation about, you know, I misread your expectations. I need support. I really want to pass this class so I can graduate this semester. Then following up with them. How did it go with your faculty member? What did they say? And based on that response, finding them the next best thing. And again, that's guiding them through difficult conversations. That's guiding them through bad news. That's guiding them through good news too, though. So it's not all risk. And it's important as we're doing this to make those opportunities happen wherever you can. It doesn't just have to be in the advising realm. It can be anywhere. It can be in your orientation. It can be just swinging by a class. And swinging by a class looks a little bit different in a virtual world, right? It's asking the professor, hey, can I set up an announcement real quick? Or partnering with your student life to join the virtual student union. And set up virtual office hours. Some people will have caseloads, others won't, but students want to build those relationships, right? They might not know that you're available for them. It's bonus points if you call them student office hours rather than office hours. And the reason why is those first generation students are going to know I'm a student versus an office hour might feel very different to a first generation student and say, this is a time my instructor is not available. They're in their office doing work. They're in their office getting their research prepared or prepping for class. So you have to use it from their lens and their inexperience. Update that signature line. That's an easy peasy one that you can do today. Update your signature line. Put your pronouns on there. Again, they might be, again, cis pronouns, she, her. It's not about what your pronoun is. It's about letting students know that you're aware that that might be part of their identity and that it's a safe place. Put your phone number in there. A lot of times I see signature lines that don't have a phone number or don't have the direct email. And what that says to students is, I don't want you to contact me. I'll contact you. when I need you. You can't contact me. And so while sometimes we say, okay, come on guys, talk to me, we're also putting that hand out and saying, no, I'm not approachable. So make yourself approachable. Respond within 1 business day. And if you keep that accountability across your institution, could you imagine that equity gap closing because everybody is getting access to information in a timely fashion? And everybody's being held to the same standard. So the one poor advisor who actually does respond quickly doesn't get burdened because they're known as the person who responds. And have meet and greet webinars. This is your faculty advisor. This is your academic advisor. This is your career coach. This is the person who's in charge of workforce development. Host major specific webinars. What can you do with a career in XYZ? Host just generic ones that are about topics that we all know students have. Math anxiety, right? Coping with difficult emotions, how to study in the virtual environment, just little easy peasy one-offs. If you don't want to do it in webinar format, do it in a commercial format with just little videos. And collaborate with others. You don't have to do this all yourself. Like, get with the person who is so good at Snapchat. I have a lot of people who understand TikTok. I can't even download it. That's how far behind I am. So I'm not going to put anything on TikTok, but I know a guy and I know a girl. So partner with people who you can play up to their strengths. Also, bring in that non-academic stuff, that co-curricular stuff. So that transfer advising. Bring in the hot topics. In Virginia, we're right next to Washington, D.C., and we were literally, our parking lots were used to hold buses for the military when they came during the insurrection. And we had to close down all of our campuses, but we also had to have conversations with students. Like, this is what's going on in our world. Let's talk about it. And you can't just brush it under the rug. And advisors needed to be there because they needed to build those relationships. You can't just be there for the good times or for the academic times. You have to be there all the times. I go to Black chats every Tuesday. Why? Because I want my Black students to know that I have some clue about their perspective. No, I can't say I identify with certain things. I can't say I'm woke. I can't say anything like that, but I have some idea that my perspective is not the only one. And that's what it's all about. It's being visible and not just during registration week. Virtual career fairs, virtual transfer fairs, partnering your students with peer mentors, having those students who are on academic probation and or just coming out of academic suspension who are struggling and just need someone to talk to, have them work with your presidential scholars. Another idea is having parents talk to other parents. It's very easy to make these connections. Parents naturally they're naturally able to share ideas, and just creating a safe space in the virtual area like we are today is an easy peasy way to do that, to connect them. And then spotlight the cool stuff. Spotlight's free money. Everybody loves scholarships. And I'll be honest, I had a really low grade point average in college. Not sure how I survived it, but I had a scholarship for being Polish and Catholic. So there's scholarships out there for everybody. There's scholarships out there for DACA students. There's scholarships out there for international students. So you don't necessarily have to be a FAFSA recipient to be able to be eligible for certain scholarships and grants. But I suspect students don't know that. So letting them know. And I'm glad that I'm running ahead of schedule. That's actually good news because that means we can have some discussion after this. But really, the idea is think about your programs, think about your conversations, think about every single thing you do with the student in mind, and thinking about how can you make this program applicable or this conversation applicable to known and unknown things. So what does it look like for a person with cognitive challenges? What does it look like for a student who has disability support services? What does it look like for a student who has mental health challenges, but they don't rise to the level of getting an academic accommodation related to disability support services? What does it look like for a student who's experienced trauma? What does it look like for a student who, is 50, 60 years old and has kids who are in college as well? So thinking about these people who are not in the bar graphs, right? And really designing programs as if they're the person in front of you. And a great way to practice that is to pull out those worst case scenarios where you've fallen on your face before and use them as case studies and share them with peers. So let's get to the questions.
Everybody feel free to use the question and answer box or send it through the chat, whatever you want to do. Thank you, Dr. Pascal. That was, I feel inspired. I feel like that was a call to action. Like, I just really enjoyed that presentation. So we're looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. So in full disclosure, there we go. Not a single question.
Cynthia, I'll go ahead and ask you a question to get us started. And
Thanks.
It's just,
get us oiled up.
Absolutely. It's just, if you could share some of the biggest takeaways on how you provide warm handoffs. You've talked a little bit about reaching out and getting Bridget's name and things like that, but how do you maintain the ability to do that on top of advising hundreds of students? Many of our advisors, the advisors in NSHE, may have the advising student ratio of 800 to 1. So what are some of the best practices?
Absolutely. So I'll be honest, the warm handoff model is actually a medical model. And I learned about it when I went in for emergency surgery. I filled out, like the questionnaire, and all of a sudden they provided me with wraparound services. So much so, I woke up and there was a priest. And I was like, am I dying? Am I getting final rites? And they're like, no, you put on your thing that you're Catholic. And I was like, oh, well, okay. But that's how in tune the medical field is with wraparound services for their patients. And so that same model can be applied to academics. And that is really looking at students as again, humans, leading with empathy and not wanting to give students the bounce or the shuffle. People call it different things. And so what it is making sure, and they do it, medical processes do it from a liability issue. For us, it's more accountability, but making sure that person gets to what the resource they need or the service they need or the human they need. And so what I do often is introduce the student to a person via email, or ask the student to introduce themselves and use a developmental approach, and then CC me, because whatever the instructor responds with might not be something that a student's going to be able to code, right? They're going to have to decode this information, especially if we're speaking in handbook style lingo or we're speaking in policy and procedures. The student's like, what does that mean? Or what do you mean? Like, this is going to impact my financial aid. What's financial aid? And so really being there and developing those relationships. And then following up, last week we talked about you going to tutoring. How did that go? Oh, you weren't able to go? Let's talk about why. And so it's building that trust and accountability with each other, and also building that trust and accountability with your peers. I know who to give people to. And, regretfully, that means that that the wealth isn't distributed evenly, right? Because I have my go-to people. But that's why putting it from a college perspective, that accountability in place, everybody's going to respond within 24 hours. That's why it's a game changer when we're talking about things like warm handoffs. The other thing I like to do is, instead of just giving students the phone number, I like to call the person and transfer the student in. So that the person who I'm calling, I say, hey, it's Cynthia. The student is panicking on the other line. I'm about to transfer you in. I don't want them to have to perform the trauma. This is what happened. And then when they come in, hey, Cynthia tells me that you're really struggling with withdrawing from this course. I'm on it. How can I be of service? And so that helps students as well. And so that's what I think the Warren handoff is. If you have a customer relationship management software system, there's an easier way to do it, and that's by knocking it out by groups and making watch lists for yourself, where you're like, these are all my students on academic probation, or these are all my students in a 15-week class versus an 8-week class. I know that midterms are on week 6. And then you can power blast out these emails. The last thing I will say with that, and that goes to the warm handoff and making it like unique, like a boutique experience versus this rubber stamp experience, is I have made spreadsheets that go into my email documents. So it populates the name in the course. So if a student is in Math 111, it'll say, hey, Susie, how's your Math 111 course going? I don't know that Susie's in Math 111, but my spreadsheet does. And so it's just, practicing new and inventive ways. Great resources out there for that. You can just do a quick Google search for EAB, for the John Gardner Institute, for NACADA. It's out there. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We do have a lot of questions if you
I stalled, guys.
Yeah, they're flowing in. So one I want to get to first because it's directly related to CoRec, and I would love to get your perspective on this. So we had somebody ask, you were talking about characteristics unique to today's students, and you mentioned demographic changes and their association with preparatory classes. One thing I noticed is that a strong majority of today's students are also working to support their families, and often full-time. And that too is associated with demographics. The student of color is more likely to work through college. So how do we encourage these students to take more credits, make more investment in this CoRec model when they're already so busy and so financially strained? How would you handle that if a student said, well, I don't know about this support because it's added credits and added financial?
So what you're talking about are resource limited students, right? They have to work full-time jobs. They have to work multiple jobs sometimes. And this is the part that's messed up. Sometimes they're working multiple jobs and still below poverty line. And so what it is getting them connected with the resources they need on the front end so that they don't have to focus on where the next meal is going to be. They don't have to focus on how that electricity bill is going to be paid. They don't have to focus on a $300 textbook. And so it's really making things, it's really getting out the holistic toolbox and saying, what are my community resources? Where is this free money? Especially when you talk about the different like HERF grants and stuff like that are going out from the federal government. Like, how do I exploit that? Most students, most employees for that matter, are eligible for programs like SNAP. What would it look like if you didn't have to worry about paying for food for your family so that you could take one more extra class? And what we know is also that the students who prolong their degree, they're getting further away to that full-time job. And so if we can get them as much resources as at the beginning, that's what we want. Even as far as we at NOVA have created a financial stability program. We're teaching them how to do their taxes so they don't have to pay. We're teaching them how to sign up for SNAP. We are getting them connected with vouchers for childcare. And so every dollar that doesn't go out of their pocket to something that should be kind of a fundamental right to people, right? We're helping them reinvest that in themselves and saying it's okay to reinvest it in yourself, because that's what it is. It's an investment, right? Now, I will say, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and he comes from a very, very urban neighborhood. And he said, he always says, I take a gamble on myself. That's the language he speaks. It's a gamble, bet on yourself, because that's the thing you can control. So if we can help students bet on themselves, I mean, that's how you kind of bust this equity thing wide open. But it is a systemic challenges. It can't just be a wish or just saying nice thing in an empathetic way. It's deconstructing a failed system.
Yeah.
Ooh, so much soapbox over here. You can't even see
Yeah.
the.
I love it.
Fired up and ready to go.
Yeah.
That's right, people.
I think this next question really flows from what you were saying, because a lot of what you're describing is really intense support. And this person wants to know, with advising ratios that are very high, she's talking 1,200 to 1. How do you balance the just prescriptive needs of students and the needs to hear them and know our advisees and be that, the human that they're interacting with?
This might not be the answer that everybody wants to hear, but this is the answer that I'm familiar with. So it's a lived experience for this person who used to, when I was a professional academic advisor versus an administrator, my case was 1,500 for 4 programs. And that had a lot to do with group advising. And so what I would do is I would host orientations where I would host the orientation so they knew my face. I would host what you could do with a career in. I had a workshop that said, things that you're going to say, we never told you, but we've told you 6 or 7 times, because they're like, nobody ever told me I was going to lose money if I didn't drop before the refund diet. Yeah, we did. So like, I would have these resource things, and that's kind of sarcastic, but it was what it was. But then you're speaking to 30 students instead of 1. And then one student is going to pull you aside after class and say, hey, Ms. P, can I talk to you about this? And I'm going to say, yes, let's talk. And so what it is it's being present and speaking to the larger crowds, and especially in this virtual environment. I mean, we're talking to 138 people right now. Group advising can be your entire advising caseload if you have a partner in crime who's willing to work the chat with you. So it doesn't have to be every man for themselves. And then run your data analytics for students who are at risk, run your data analytics for milestone classes, and be a little bit more strategic with how you use your time. And that would be my suggestion.
That's great. And that's perfect. It flows right into another question we have is,
my mind reading?
With your many years of experience in the virtual environment, do you have any tech platforms or programs that you can't live without?
Okay, so we switched to Canvas 2 years ago. I don't know what platform you guys are on. We created a virtual student union, right? Now I've had that virtual student union for 10 years, but it sucks scissors. I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't good. And then we moved to, sorry guys. So it was terrible. I didn't like it. It didn't work for students, and it really didn't give students motivation to engage. And then we switched to Canvas, and it was so user-friendly. And all of a sudden I could host events in a larger space with more students. And then the pandemic hit. And we said, you know what? We won't just focus on these 23,000 online students. We're going to get everybody involved. Come with me. Let's go, guys. And now we have 73,000 students in the virtual student union. And how awesome is that to give the same message to all 73,000 students? That's what week's coming up. Here's what to expect. And then we host webinars, right? Just like we're doing now. And we bring all the stakeholders in. So if I'm going to talk about a new program that we're rolling out, or a new grant that the governor gave us money for that we have to figure out how to do that overnight, I'm going to invite in financial aid. I'm going to invite in the content experts. I'm going to invite in the dual enrollment specialists who are working with high school students. I'm going to invite in senior leadership who can answer these high level questions that I have no clue to answer. And I'm going to invite in the captioners, because I know, serving 180 countries as a NOVA employee, that not everybody's going to be able to follow my fast-paced talking. Even if they aren't hearing challenged, they might still need the extra support. So I'm going to invite all those people in and have that conversation in one space. So that's the one I can't live without. The other thing is I moved my entire team and then the entire college onto one shared email system where we can all search each other's emails. We use a tool called SmarterTrack. There's plenty of tools out there. I'm not a salesperson, but what it does is when someone calls the call center and says, my advisor hasn't called me in weeks and I sent out 3 emails and they're the worst and you're the worst and everybody's the worst. And you can say, oh, well, I see here that your advisors responded to you on this date and this date and this date with clear guidance. Have you checked your school email versus your personal email? And it's that simple, right? And so those are some of the tools that I like to use. There's tons of them out there. It just depends on what your needs are.
That is awesome. I had not heard of that tool where you can search each other's email. What a cool idea.
It also has a chat feature, so we do virtual chats too.
Nice. Love it. Okay, here's another really good question. How do you suggest handling an oops, ouch situation where you may have unintentionally had a negative impact on a student? Like how to move forward with acknowledging the student's feelings and turn it into a learning moment. How do you do that?
I think you just said it. You took my answer. We're gonna fall flat. We're gonna say things that we are embarrassed about. I literally oversaw disability support services. And I thought, again, that I was really good at my job. And I had a student say, well, that's pretty ableist of you. And I was like, what? And the reality is, I didn't think it was, but it doesn't make a difference what I think. It's what they think. Their perception is their reality. So whether I agree with it or not, I have to acknowledge the hurt. And I want to give you guys a tool that I live by, and that's VAR. Validate, appreciate, refer. Validate. You know, I didn't even think about it like that. I thought I was saying this, and I realized that was an oops, and I'm sorry. Appreciate it. I really appreciate you bring that to my attention, because I don't want to be a person who steps on people's toes. I want to be a person who is part of the inclusion process, not excluding students. And sometimes if it's a referral, you know, or a resource or whatever, that's what I usually do for anything is validate, appreciate, refer. You can refer them out, you can get them, you know, I realized the impact that had on you. That must have been really stressful. You know, just so you know, we do have free and affordable community resources for mental health so that you can unpack that in a safe space and so that we can continue to build our relationship. It's not about the oops. The oops happen. Unless you have a time machine, you can't go back in time. So it's what you do with that oops that's a big deal. And it might be your school doing the oops. And so, you know, you have to stick by your value system and leave with ethics and integrity and say, you know, I acknowledge the hurt. How can we move forward?
I love that. We talk a lot about intent versus impact, right? Doesn't matter how it's intended, it matters how it was received and what the impact was on the person. Yeah, very good. Let's see, what do we have next? Are you familiar with the transformative social emotional learning? Transformative social emotional learning. Our program at UNLV and CSN Transfer is using it as a framework for advising, and I was wondering if you can provide any other equity-based resources.
So I'm not familiar, and it might just be that I know it as something else. So the resources that have been a game changer for me, you guys, and I'm going to put this out there, is Achieving the Dream. They will knock your little socks off. They have holistic student support services redesign kits. They have academic redesign kits, and they're just good at what they do. And it's free. I like free. And then the Hope Center for Change, which really talks about housing, food, inequities. And I did not know what I did not know, and that is awkward. I also really believe in trauma-informed pedagogy, which is pretty new, as well as I've done some ALICE training, and that's asset limited income students. And so those are the different things that have informed my practice. I can't wait to look up what you guys are doing. I'm not gonna lie, I was joking with one of your administrators prepping for this, and I went to a UNLV presentation years and years and years ago at NACADA and stole all of your ideas. So maybe this is when I get a steal. Patent pending, of course.
That's awesome. Well, I have a lot of people asking about posting the link to your presentation. I know you mentioned something like that. If you want to throw it in the chat to everybody, feel free to do that. But we're also going to share the recording, as Renee pointed out earlier. So the recording will be posted. And I'm sure if Dr. Pascal doesn't mind, we will send her slides out to everybody that's registered as well.
Yeah, and so that's what I meant. I didn't make a link. It's just my presentation. And please, if you look in the notes, I give credit where credit's due. So this is not original thought or design. This is stuff I've learned from professional development along the years that is open educational, so really those OER resources. So take them, use them, adapt them, make them yours.
Awesome. So we have, I think, a really good question. We have more time, right, Theo? About a couple more minutes. Okay. So this one's giving you kudos for your great presentation, and that it's giving them food for thought. So I really like this question because I think it gets back to your point earlier that it might be the college or the institution that is the hurt, right? Or that it has the system or structure that is inequitable, right? So how can a college ensure evidence-based, equity-embedded advising? Like, how do you make that a structure at your institution?
That was a loaded question.
It was big.
Yeah. That's the elephant in the room, right? That we're not talking about. You have to push for systemic change at every place you go. And you have to not settle, and you have to ask difficult questions, and it's gonna hurt. But what you're gonna do, and this is the cool part, I told you I almost bombed out of college. I'm a master manipulator. You're gonna get all those people with the good voices and the good networks, you're gonna get them on board. Right? And you're going to have them be your influencers, and they're going to have a ripple effect. And you're going to say, we want to do inclusive advising practices that are student ready. And this form does not do that. And this policy does not do that. And what you do is you get everybody sending the same message. And as people are creating new programs and policies and procedures, having those right people at the table. If you're someone who always sees challenges are being brought up, but you're not saying anything, that's kind of part of the problem, right? That's when we talk about that anti-racist pedagogy. You actually have to say something, even if it's awkward. And so sometimes that means volunteering for another committee, volunteering for another scholarship review or something like that, whatever it is, so that you can be at the table where it happens. And then when you get there, you got to bring others. You know who would be great for this? And then pull them up. I promise you there's enough success for everybody. So as you grow and develop, bring others up with you. And that's part of equitable design too, is allowing others to succeed as well.
Oh, what a good point. I love that answer. I think that's exactly right. I do have somebody that has a follow-up to the Corequisite question earlier, and I think it's a great point, and we can leave this linger out there probably for Renee to think about, and maybe something you can talk about in April. Someone says it feels weird to tell our students to bet on themselves when we're asking for extra investment from them, financial investment on the front end that would further contribute to equity gaps that we're concerned about. we can talk about that, but why not allow these extra supports to be free or otherwise subsidized? That would be systemic change. And I don't disagree, anonymous attendee.
So I will say part of what I've done is I've joined ACE is the American College on Education, One DuPont Circle. Anyhow, they have networks that work specifically with legislators, but also with lobbyists. And you know what I've done? Made really good friends with those lobbyists. Specifically, we are not allowed to offer mental health services directly at community colleges in Virginia. And you want to know what? We have mental health issues. So like, it doesn't change it. Just like you say, you know, we're giving them free resources to free food. It doesn't change the fact that they're still hungry and still need money in their pocket, right? So you got to buddy up. And that's you have to play the long game on that one, but it can be done. And that's when you start calling your representatives and pushing the envelope everywhere. Why aren't we doing this? And be the change you want to see in the world. It also comes down to, you got to register to vote for your beliefs, because it's the people who we put in places that are at our various levels, whether it be locally or statewide, who also make these policies and procedures and sign off on these bills. So, so many soapboxes, you guys.
Well, I want to give time to Renee for a few closing thoughts, but Cynthia, thank you so much for your insight, your knowledge, your dedication to students. I wish that I had an advisor like you when I was in an undergrad. I don't think I would have spiraled as much as I did. So thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for your time today. And again, we will share Cynthia's presentation with everyone, and we'll work with Renee to get the information available on the CoRec website, which she has shared with you earlier. But with that, I'd like to pass it off to Renee to close us out.
Thanks, Theo. First of all, let me just start with a heartfelt thanks for Cynthia. What a fantastic presentation. We thank you for sharing the great work that you're doing and all of the resources that you have presented. We couldn't do this co-requisite implementation with all of the advisors here and with all of the teamwork that we've seen from across the nation, all of the great presenters, the strategies, the resources. So thanks very much. And so that extends to Theo and Vanessa. Thanks so much for putting all of this together. Looking forward to our next event in April as well. You do great work, and Theo, we miss you, and we're so glad that we have some time with you today. Sorry about that. I've got a call coming in. We're going to put that on pause. And so let me also express appreciation for all of you advisors. We know we have fantastic advisors throughout the NSHE system. I know how hard you work. As Theo mentioned at the beginning, I started in a financial aid office at TMCC as a financial aid advisor. I know it's not exactly the same, but I have a real understanding of the work that you all do day to day to day. And I understand those large caseloads. I understand you're there for the student each and every day. So thank you for carving out a little time to take part in this session. Let me again mention the CoRec website. There are lots of resources there. I plugged that a couple times in the chat. You also have my email address. So please use those resources and to do a little research on what the co-requisite task force has been up to. There are some really exciting things happening in math and English. And those PDs are also available to anyone who's interested in taking a look at them. So feel free to check those out as well if you just want to know more about the nuts and bolts. Don't forget to sign up for the April event if you haven't already done so. That link is also on the CoRec website. So you just takes just a minute to do that. And at that, I think I'll end there and say, see you all in April.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, guys. It was a wonderful day.